India's defense industry. They're on this really fascinating journey, aiming to become like a global powerhouse.
Yeah.
But can they really pull it off?
Yeah.
Like, is that even possible? Today, we're going to do a deep dive into how India's defense industry has evolved, exploring this whole Make in India thing and uncovering the challenges they face. And to do that, we've got excerpts from a couple of books on the Indian defense industry and this really cool brochure showcasing some of their key companies. So let's jump in and see if they can really make this leap from importer to exporter.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that this whole transition from dependence to being self-reliant, it's not a straight line. Like you can't just draw it with a ruler. It's more like India's journey has these distinct phases.
Okay.
And each one of these phases has its own successes and its own struggles.
So let's go back to the very beginning.
Okay.
What was like the main driving force behind India's initial push?
Yeah.
Make their own defense stuff.
So right after independence, from 1947 to 1962, the focus was totally on state-led growth. Okay, so they're busy setting up ordnance factories and like a really basic R&D setup, which eventually became the DRDO. That's the Defense Research and Development Organization.
So basically laying the foundation.
Exactly.
But was this initial push towards self-sufficiency, was that based on like a strategic vision, or was it more about reacting to like pressures from outside of India?
It's interesting because while they were laying the groundwork, stuff was happening outside, like that 1954 U.S.-Pakistan partnership, And then you've got border tensions with China heating up. So all of that really sped up India's quest to be self-sufficient.
Like a wake-up call.
Kind of, yeah. It's like a classic example of how things outside can really shape what's going on inside a country.
For sure. So it sounds like there were some signs of ambition even before these geopolitical things happened.
Yeah.
The brochure mentions this Hindustan aircraft factory set up in Bangalore in 1940.
Oh, yeah. That was started by an industrialist, this guy named Walchand Hirachand, way before independence even happened.
What?
Talk about thinking ahead. And get this. Despite having a low-tech focus and limited state funding, India still managed to do some amazing things in those early years.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They even eased their dependence on foreign suppliers for certain military equipment.
That's impressive for a newly independent nation.
It is.
So were there any specific achievements that really stand out from that period?
Oh, absolutely. Hindustan Aeronautics Limited.
Yeah.
So HAL, they made significant progress assembling aircraft under license. So they produced trainers like the Prentice the Vampire and the de Havilland. But what's really impressive is that they also designed trainers themselves.
No way.
Yeah. Like the HT-2, that one was authorized in 48 and first flew in 51.
Wow. That's just a few years after becoming independent. Designing and building your own aircraft. That's huge.
It is.
But then, like you said, India's defense journey takes a turn.
Yeah.
The 1962 war with China seemed to trigger a new strategy.
Right. So after that war, India started relying more on the Soviet Union, which kind of led to this era of licensed production. And while that definitely helped make their military stronger, it also had a downside.
I bet. Because relying on someone else's designs doesn't really help you innovate, does it?
No, not really. It's a trade-off. You get stronger military in the short term, but it limits your own ability to design and manufacture stuff. In fact, a former DRDO head even called this phase a boring succession of licenses.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like if they weren't really becoming self-reliant, just copying what others were doing.
So how did India break free from that cycle of just making licensed stuff?
Well, things started to change. When India opened up its economy in 1991, and then in 2001, the defense sector finally opened up to private companies.
It's a big deal.
Huge turning point. It opened up all these opportunities for collaborations, like the BrahMos missile project. That was a joint venture with Russia.
The BrahMos is always talked about as a success story.
It is.
So did that lead to more joint ventures?
Yeah, definitely. It paved the way for more of them, for aircraft and missile systems.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about letting private companies in. The government actually started encouraging them to participate.
How'd they do that? Like, what specific steps did they take to get the private sector involved?
Well, they introduced revised policies like the Defense Procurement Procedure, or DPP, which favored Indigenous design and development. And they went a step further by introducing this concept of strategic partners.
Okay.
These are private companies chosen for major projects based on what they're good at and their expertise.
A more targeted approach.
Exactly.
So did it actually work? Did private players actually step up and get those big contracts?
They did. A perfect example is Tata Power SCD winning that huge $158 million MAFI project. And get this, they outbid an Italian giant.
Wow.
So that proves that the private sector in India could compete globally.
That's a big win.
Yeah.
It sounds like India's defense industry was finally picking up speed, but I imagine there were, and probably still are, some big hurdles to get over.
Right. You're right. There are challenges. Let's start with R&D and innovation. DRDO is the main R&D organization, but they face a lot of hurdles, like bureaucracy and funding limitations. And their output of commercially viable patents has been pretty low compared to what other countries are doing.
So even with good intentions, sometimes the system itself can get in the way.
Yeah, for sure.
So what about the collaboration between DRDO, the armed forces, and these new private players? Was that smooth sailing from day one?
Not quite. The lack of coordination between these key players often leads to inefficiencies in how projects are developed. It's like trying to build something really complex, with different teams working from different blueprints.
So are there any examples of projects that actually made it through all that complexity
Yeah.
and were successful? Projects that prove that when everyone's on the same page, things can move quickly.
There are. The Dhanush 155mm artillery gun is a good one. It was developed in only 16 months.
Wow, it's fast.
It is. And that was because the Army Ordnance Factories, DRDO, and the Quality Assurance Agencies all worked together really well.
That's a phenomenal turnaround time, especially for something that big. But you're saying that Dhanush is more like the exception, not the rule.
Unfortunately, yeah. India's overall investment in R&D, especially from the private sector, is pretty low, and that really hurts their global ranking when it comes to innovation.
Makes sense. So it's kind of a mixed bag, right? There's potential for innovation, but the system doesn't always make it easy. Now let's talk about those public sector companies, the ordnance factories and DPSUs. They've been around for a while. Are they stepping up to this challenge?
Well, it's complicated. They played a really important role in those early phases, but there are some worries about how efficient they are, how productive they are, and their ability to adapt to a more competitive environment. You know what I mean?
So what kinds of challenges are they facing? Are these just normal growing pains for big organizations, or is it something more serious?
They're dealing with issues that a lot of large organizations have, like too many staff, low capacity utilization, and even problems with how they manage their inventory. It's all impacting their ability to be as quick and responsive as they need to be in today's fast-paced defense world.
That sounds familiar. I've heard similar concerns about big organizations in other industries. Has this led to any discussions about what their role should be in the future? Are there any solutions being explored?
Absolutely. There's a whole debate happening right now about whether to corporatize or disinvest in OFs and DPSUs as a way to improve how they perform. But there are strong opinions on both sides, so finding the right approach is really important.
It sounds like a sensitive issue.
It is.
Now let's shift gears and talk about the private players who seem eager to make their mark. What are some of the obstacles they're hitting, even with those policy changes designed to encourage them to participate?
It's not all smooth sailing. Even with the doors open, private companies still have to navigate this really complex procurement process. And they have limited access to testing facilities, plus it's hard to get funding. And then there's the workforce issue.
What's going on with the workforce? Are there just not enough skilled workers in India?
It's not just about how many workers there are. It's about having workers with the specific skills needed for defense manufacturing. There's a gap there. And that's a big hurdle for these private companies.
So even with the right intentions and policies in place, there are still some fundamental challenges to overcome. We hear a lot about this offset policy. How effective has that actually been in boosting the local industry?
So the offset policy basically says that foreign companies who win Indian defense contracts have to reinvest a certain percentage of the contract value back into the Indian economy.
Okay.
It's supposed to help local industries grow and create this ripple effect.
So in theory, it sounds like everyone wins. But has it really worked out that way?
It's been a mixed bag. It's definitely helped with export growth, but it hasn't been as successful when it comes to technology transfer and high-end manufacturing. When you compare India's offset policy to countries like Canada, South Korea, and the UAE, you can see they have some room for improvement.
So a well-intentioned policy that maybe needs a little tweaking to really reach its full potential. Looking ahead, how does all this play into the future of Make in India in defense? What are some of the key policy changes or initiatives that could help India achieve its big goals?
Well, DPP 2016 introduced some pretty important changes. One of them is this Buy Indian IDDM category, which gives priority to products that were developed and manufactured in India.
Okay.
They also introduced the L1T1 method for awarding contracts, which looks at not just the lowest price, but also how technologically advanced the bid is.
Interesting.
These are big steps towards getting people to design and develop stuff locally and increase the use of parts and components made in India.
So the focus is shifting from just buying things from other countries to actually building them at home. But as we've been discussing, policy changes aren't enough. What else needs to happen to make in India really take off?
You're right. We need to create a system for buying stuff that's actually friendly to the industry.
Okay.
One that's transparent, efficient, and responsive to the needs of private companies. Basically, we need to make things easier and cut through the red tape.
Because I bet those delays and uncertainties can really kill innovation and growth, especially in an industry like defense, where you need so much money up front.
Exactly. It can make or break a company, especially new ones that are just getting started. And then there's the funding problem. We need to create an environment that's more supportive, maybe with dedicated financing schemes for the defense industry or venture capital funds that specifically target defense technology. Making it easier for private companies to get government funding would also be a huge help.
So it's about building a financial system where these companies can really thrive.
And what about that skills gap we talked about? How do we fix the shortage of skilled workers who are trained for defense manufacturing?
That's where skill development comes in.
Yeah.
We need to see partnerships between the industry and schools and universities to create specialized training courses, apprenticeships, and skill certification programs that are made just for this sector.
So essentially building a pipeline of talent.
Yeah. We need to make sure people have the right skills to succeed in a high-tech industry like defense. So a multi-pronged approach is needed. But before we jump into a deeper analysis of all these initiatives and their potential impact, let's focus on some specific examples of Indian defense companies. We'll take a look at what they're good at, their successes, and the challenges they face, so we can get a real sense of what Make in India actually looks like in action. So we've been talking about the big picture, the policies and the challenges and the potential of India's defense industry. But let's get into the specifics and look at some companies that are actually making things happen, on the ground. What kind of expertise are we seeing from these Indian defense companies?
One of the most interesting things about India's defense industry is how diverse it is. Like, we're seeing companies that specialize in everything, from traditional weapons and ammunition to super advanced drone technology. And this brochure really highlights that range.
Okay, so let's start with a company that caught my eye, Munitions India Limited. Their name is pretty straightforward. But what exactly are they making?
They're a major player in the munitions sector. They make a whole bunch of different products. We're talking about explosives like TNT RDX and HMX Plus propellants for all sorts of ammunition. They even produce those bimodular charge systems for 155mm artillery guns, like the ones used in the Dhanush we were talking about earlier.
So they're playing a really key role in equipping the Indian Armed Forces.
Yeah.
But is making conventional munitions enough in today's world? I mean, the defense landscape is changing so rapidly. Aren't we seeing a global shift towards things like precision munitions and smart weapons?
You're absolutely right. The global landscape is definitely changing. And if India wants to be a real contender in the global defense market, they need to adapt. So while companies like Munitions India are meeting a current need, there needs to be a focus on developing those next generation technologies as well.
So where are those cutting-edge technologies being developed? Are there Indian companies working on things like drones and those really sophisticated surveillance systems?
Definitely. There's a company called Asteria Aerospace. They're doing some really cool work with unmanned aerial systems, or drones, as most people call them. And it's not just about the hardware. They're developing the software and the data analytics capabilities too. So they're creating complete solutions.
So it's like a package deal, the drone itself and the brains behind how it operates.
Yeah.
What kind of drones are we talking about here? What can they do?
Asteria has a range of different platforms. They've got smaller tactical drones like the A400 and A200. Those are designed for short-range surveillance. And then they have larger, more sophisticated systems like the T100, which can operate at higher altitudes and for longer periods of time. All of these drones are equipped with high-resolution cameras, sensors, and communication systems.
That sounds incredibly useful for all sorts of applications, from border security and counterterrorism operations to even disaster relief efforts. It's like having eyes in the sky, providing real-time intelligence.
Exactly. And Asteria isn't just building drones. They're pushing the boundaries of what these systems can do. They're working on autonomous navigation, AI-powered data analysis, and even swarm drone capabilities, where multiple drones work together in a coordinated way.
That's impressive. It really does sound like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. It sounds like India is moving beyond just catching up and becoming a real innovator in defense technology. Are there other companies we should have on our radar?
Oh, there are tons of exciting companies popping up. Alpha Design Technologies is making waves in electronic warfare systems. Parat Forge is known for their artillery guns and armored vehicles. And Goa Shipyard Limited is building advanced offshore patrol vessels.
It seems like the private sector is really bringing some much-needed energy to the industry. They're not just filling gaps or pushing boundaries and introducing new capabilities, but we talked earlier about the challenges they face. Navigating the procurement process, securing funding, finding skilled talent. Are there any specific policy changes or initiatives that could help them overcome these hurdles and really unleash their potential?
There are definitely some areas that need attention. First and foremost, we've got to streamline that procurement process. That means less bureaucracy, more transparency, and faster decision-making.
Because I bet those delays and uncertainties can really hurt innovation and growth, especially in an industry like defense, where you need so much capital up front.
Absolutely. It can be the difference between success and failure for a company, especially for a new company trying to get established. And then there's the funding issue. We need to create a more supportive environment, maybe by setting up dedicated financing schemes for the defense industry or venture capital funds that focus specifically on defense technology. And we've got to make it easier for private companies to access government funding. That would be a huge step in the right direction.
So it's about creating that financial ecosystem where these companies can thrive. And what about that skills gap we discussed earlier? How do we fix the shortage of skilled workers who are specifically trained for defense manufacturing?
We need a serious effort in skill development. We need partnerships between the industry and educational institutions to create specialized training courses, apprenticeships, and skill certification programs that are tailor-made for this sector.
But we're talking about building a pipeline of talent, basically.
Exactly. We have to make sure that the workforce has the right skills to succeed in a high-tech industry like defense. What about attracting foreign investment and expertise? Could that help speed up making India?
That's a good point.
Absolutely. Even though it has its shortcomings, the offset policy can be used more effectively. Instead of just treating it like a transaction, we should encourage foreign companies to set up manufacturing facilities and R&D centers in India as part of their offset obligations. That would create a ripple effect, boosting local expertise, creating jobs, and fostering a more self-reliant ecosystem.
So turning those offsets into a catalyst for long-term technological advancement, not just a one-time deal. That sounds like a smart strategy.
It is. And finally, we can't forget about innovation. It's essential to foster a culture of research and development. That means increasing government funding for DRDO, creating incentives for private sector R&D, and promoting collaboration between research institutions, the armed forces, and private companies.
So breaking down those silos and encouraging a more integrated approach to innovation, it seems like achieving this ambition of becoming a global defense manufacturing hub requires a strategy that tackles everything, from procurement and funding to skills development and technology transfer.
You're absolutely right. It's a complex equation, but the potential payoff is huge, not just for India's economy, but for its standing in the world and its strategic autonomy.
It sounds like India is at a crucial moment in its defense industry journey. They've laid the groundwork, they're making progress, but they still have a long way to go. What are some of the key questions that will determine whether India can really achieve its goal of becoming a major player in the global defense arena?
I think one of the most important questions is, can India create a procurement process that's more efficient and transparent, one that encourages the private sector to participate and fosters innovation? Another key question is, can India close that skills gap and develop a workforce that can handle the demands of this high-tech industry?
And what about the role of those public sector companies? Can they adapt and evolve to become more competitive in this changing landscape?
That's a critical question. And then there's the geopolitical aspect. Can India build strategic partnerships that help with technology transfer and open up new markets for their defense products?
A lot hinges on India's ability to navigate these complex challenges and use its strengths. It's a fascinating story unfolding, one that has the potential to reshape the global defense landscape. We've talked about India's goal of becoming a major player in the global defense industry, and we've seen how private companies are really shaking things up, bringing in new ideas and innovations. But what does this Make in India shift actually look like in action? Are these companies really able to compete on a global level?
It's one thing to have a vision, right? But it's another thing entirely to actually make it happen. And what's really exciting is that we're seeing real results. Like these companies featured in this brochure, they're not just producing stuff for India, they're actively trying to sell their products to other countries, which is a huge step towards becoming a global force.
So they're not content with just supplying the Indian Armed Forces. They want to be exporters of defense technology.
Yeah.
Are there any specific examples that really stand out? Companies that are already making a name for themselves in the international market?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Take MKU, for example. They specialize in personal protective gear, like body armor, helmets, bulletproof vests, that sort of thing. And they've already got contracts with countries in Asia, the Middle East, even Europe.
Really?
Yeah, their products are known for being high quality, and they use advanced technology. They're going head-to-head with the big players in the global market.
That's a great example. It shows that Indian companies can actually produce top-notch defense equipment that meets international standards. But what about more complex systems, things like aircraft or warships? Are Indian companies making progress in those areas too?
Absolutely. We can look at companies like Mazagon Dock Shipbuilders Limited, or MDL. They're one of India's top shipyards, and they specialize in building warships and submarines. They've built some pretty sophisticated stuff for the Indian Navy, like destroyers and stealth frigates, and now they're setting their sights on the export market.
So from protective gear to warships, it seems like Indian companies are covering a wide range of defense capabilities. But I imagine they're up against some tough competition from those established players in the global market.
Oh, absolutely. The global defense market is super competitive. You've got companies from the US, Russia, France, Israel, all fighting for the same contracts. And many of these companies have been around for decades. They've got these established supply chains and deep relationships with their customers.
So how can Indian companies break into that market? What are some of the biggest challenges they need to overcome?
One of the toughest challenges is building a reputation for reliability and quality. In the defense industry, trust is everything. Customers need to know, without a doubt, that the equipment they're buying will work when they need it most, especially in those high-pressure situations.
Because if a weapon malfunctions or a piece of equipment fails, the consequences could be disastrous.
Yeah.
So how do you build that trust?
It takes time. It takes consistent performance. And it takes a real commitment to meeting international standards. It also means building strong relationships with potential customers, really understanding what they need, and offering solutions that are specifically designed for them.
So it's a long game. It's about building trust and proving yourself on the world stage. Are there any other hurdles these companies are facing?
Another challenge is navigating those really complicated export regulations. And all those restrictions on technology transfer, defense technology, is very sensitive. And governments are understandably careful about who they allow to have access to it.
Right. It makes sense. It's about finding that balance between promoting exports and protecting national security interests.
Yeah.
So how are Indian companies dealing with these regulations?
It takes a careful and strategic approach. They have to work closely with government agencies, build partnerships with foreign companies who can help them navigate all the complexities, and they have to make absolutely sure that all their export activities are following both domestic and international regulations.
So it's not just about making a great product. It's also about understanding the global political landscape and the rules of the game in the international defense market.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of financing, especially for big projects like building warships or developing advanced aircraft. Those require a lot of money up front.
And getting that funding can be tough,
Yeah.
especially for companies that are relatively new to the export market.
Yeah, that's right. They might not have the same access to capital as their more established competitors. And that's where government support can be crucial. Policies that encourage investment in the defense sector, provide export financing, and offer incentives for research and development can give those Indian companies a real leg up.
So it sounds like India's success in achieving its Make in India goals in defense will depend not just on what its companies can do, but also on the government creating a policy environment that supports them.
Definitely. It's a team effort. It requires collaboration between the government, the private sector research institutions, and the armed forces. Everybody needs to be working together towards the same goal.
So we've come full circle. We started by asking if India can really make that shift from being a major importer to becoming a global exporter of defense technology. What's your take on that? Can they do it?
It's tough to say for sure. It's a journey with its fair share of obstacles, but the potential is definitely there. We're seeing Indian companies coming up with innovative products. They're eager to compete on a global level, and they're starting to understand how important it is for India to be self-reliant when it comes to defense.
And they're not starting from nothing. They've got a solid foundation, a skilled workforce, and a government that seems pretty determined to make in India a reality.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole story so interesting. It's a story about ambition, innovation, and determination. It'll be fascinating to see how it all plays out in the next few years.
So for you, our listener, the takeaway is this. Keep an eye on India. This is a country that's on the rise, a rising power with a vision for its future. And as we've seen, its defense industry is playing a key role in shaping that vision. Who knows? Maybe we'll see Made in India become a symbol of quality and innovation. On the global defense stage,